Morning. So welcome to being the very first people ever at the first of the two service launch. Well done. Applaud yourself. Good job. Getting up a little bit earlier. Your gift is an extra hour to your day. What will you do with the time? Hey, I'm going to do something we don't usually do, but here's my sense is it's the first service. It's a little early. And if you haven't noticed, it is freezing cold outside, all of which makes us just bundle up emotionally and physically. So stand up to your feet for a minute. Would you do this for me? Some of you, I know, you are horrible introverts like I am. These moments don't sit well with you. Just humor me. I'd love you just to do something we used to do long ago, haven't done in a long time. Just reach around to somebody near you, say good morning, shake a hand. Just let them know that you're glad that they're here today.
How are you today?
Good. So I have been told by our cafe people that we have already gone through more coffee than usual at this point today. True story. We were pounding down the coffee before you even got here. So even our tech and everybody else is just slamming back the Java, which tells me, again, that we all come in at 9 o'clock a little bit like this. Now, here's always the reputation. I've spoke at other places where I've done 3 and 4 services in a day, and it's always the same thing. The early service is a little tired, then you wake up a little bit, then you're really awake, and then you go back to being tired again when you start getting to like noon services and stuff. So I want to see if we can break the mold a little bit here and see if we can bring the energy that 11 o'clock doesn't bring. So anybody in here think that we can be the 9 o'clock service can outdo the 11 o'clock? Listen, I'm a competitive guy. Everything's got to be a competition, all right? So who thinks 9 o'clock can outdo 11? All right. So you're going to have to help me today. You're going to have to bring a little bit of energy yourselves. Day 1 of 2 services, you're going to bring a little heat. So if something is worth applauding today, then applaud all the more. If something's worth laughing at, laugh all the more. If my joke bombs, laugh anyways and help me out, all right? If you're old school church and you like to say amen, but you don't think that's allowed here because we don't do that here, you amen it today, right? Amen. There you go. It's okay. You can amen it today, all right? So here's what I want us to do this morning. I want us to start off in a text that's going to give some direction for, I think, the whole next couple of weeks in the series that we're about to start. And we've never had the pressure of the heels of a 9 o'clock service and 11 o'clock service coming together, so we're going to jump right into it. If you have a Bible, go ahead and grab it and open it up. If not, we will put all the verses on the screen, or if you use your phone, then grab that and turn it on. Ephesians in the Bible was originally a letter written by a guy named Paul. Paul wrote this to the church in Ephesus. He wrote it under the inspiration of God's Spirit, and so when the Bible was collected together, all these various writings, it made the cut as God's inerrant word, and it became more than just a letter to the church then. It became part of the writings to us, the church today, and this is what Paul said to the Ephesians, and he also says to us. All right. This is why it is said, wake up, O sleeper. It's a good way to start here, huh? Wake up, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. And he's about to show us the difference between unwise and wise, at least in this context. He says it's this: making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. All right, participate one more time. And I want you to turn to somebody next to you, and I just want you to say this. Say 2018. Go ahead. Is the year to wake up. Here's what I think is interesting about what Paul just said. Paul did not say that the things that can happen to us on any given day are evil. Paul said the days are evil. In other words, it's as if Paul is trying to say that there is this innate ability within the days themselves on this side of eternity to have an evil ability about them, regardless of what happens in them. It's as if the days themselves carry this evil ability within them to do one thing, and it is to lull us to sleep. That's why he begins with wake up. And what would it lull us to sleep to? I think to the plans and to the relationships that the God of heaven and earth has put us on this rock for. And so today, I think in many ways is important, not just because of this launch of the second service. That's important, but this series, This series has the power, while the second service may be to create space, it's the series that has the power to create change. If we really grasp what it is that we're about to look at for the next couple of weeks. So the series we're basing slightly off of a book called The Last Arrow, the same name we're using for the series. And The Last Arrow is a book written by a guy named Erwin McManus. Now, McManus, if you don't know who he is, he's an author, he is a pastor, and he's one of those guys that, for me, from the beginning of Paradox, he has been one of the most impactful authors and pastors out there in my life. Like, your pastor needs a pastor. And McManus is one of those people to me. Never met him. He wouldn't know my name from anybody else's, but he, from a distance, has had a tremendous impact on me. And I love his latest book, The Broken Arrow. And there is a message in that book that I think is one that we as people are desperate for. And the thing is I don't know that all of us realize it, though. So McManus might give you a different reason why he titled the book The Last Arrow than I'm going to give you for why we titled the series. So let me tell you why we titled the series The Last Arrow. I am a hunter. If you don't know that, then that means that you haven't been here very long. But I love to hunt. It's one of my favorite things. I love being outside. I love being in nature. I love just relaxing. I love the smells out there. I love the hunt itself, but it's everything about the experience. I just love it. I love it. This year, I started doing something different. Been hunting for 20-some years. This year's the first year I ever went out with a bow and started hunting with a bow. And I'll tell you, I was, from the first time I went out, day one, I went out opening weekend, I was hooked. Like, I love bow hunting. If you're a bow hunter, and if you're not a hunter at all, just stick with me for a moment. If you're a bow hunter and you know that there's something just like more, it's just more visceral, right? When you bow hunt, it's just different. Like, you are way more dialed into what you're doing, because you have to be, because there's just a different margin of error in bow hunting versus gun hunting. Like, I've been gun hunting before where, man, I'm just like, I am a monkey in that tree. Like, I'm just making all kinds of noise, and I'm clanging things together, and I'm oops this and dropping that, and here comes the buck still, and I get it. Like, you're so far away, and it's so far away, you can make mistakes. But when you're bow hunting, everything's closer, which magnifies everything that you do, which means that every single move you make has got to be measured and weighed. You have to be meticulous. I mean, it's just not even noise. You could just move your elbow the wrong way and it'll catch it out of the corner of its eye because it's right there. And that just means that every single thing you do, from the stalk to the draw, everything, you have to weigh it and measure it and do it with such a different level of purpose and intentionality and focus. A friend of mine that I've been hunting with for years, who he is a bow hunter and has been for a long time, gave me some of the best advice this year. He said, when you get in a tree and when you draw back your bow and when you put your pins on that buck, he said, you pretend in your mind like that's the only arrow you have in your quiver. Now, if you're a bow hunter, and you know this, rarely, like Halley's Comet, rarely will you ever get more than one shot with a bow on a deer or whatever your game is that you're hunting. But even in a situation like that, when you approach it with the idea that there is no backup plan, there is no redo, there is no do-over, like, it just dials you in so much more. It makes you focus, it makes you weigh, it makes you measure every single move you make, every breath that you breathe, and it just makes you do what you do with a greater level of purpose and intentionality. That's the point of The Last Arrow. How do we live life that way? Like, how do we live life with that kind of purpose and focus and intentionality, weighing methodically every single move we make? And I think it starts by asking ourselves one simple question: am I presently living for what matters most? And then working constantly throughout our lives to get rid of anything that would lead us to answer that question with a no. You see, Michael, so The Last Arrow is about doing more. It's about accomplishing more in life. Not really. It's ultimately about being more the people God made you to be, being more dialed into His purposes, being more aware of the eternity in which we live, this small blip of a life that we put all of our focus into, to the neglect of the larger picture in which we have movement and breath, according to Paul, written by God. So that's what the point of The Last Arrow is. So here's what I want to do. I just want to pray. And I want to ask that this morning God will make a lot of sense of a message that comes first out of His scriptures and even in part delivered through this guy named Erwin and then through me to all of us, that we would understand better who He is and who He's made us to be. Let me pray. Father in heaven, thank you. Thank you for a day that we have to say it is another day. A day that we have to wake up in our beds, to draw breath, to open our eyes, to get in our cars, and to be here. It is cold outside, but it is a day that you have given us. And so, as the scriptures say, we rejoice and we're glad in this day that you've given us. God, would you Would you give to us not just a day, but would you give to us a day in which you are clear, in which you are tangible to us this morning and in this place? Would you give, I pray, clarity of your written word? Would you give clarity to my thoughts? Even feeling a little bit just myself, being honest, God, that I'm a creature of routine. I love routine. And as excited as I am about moving to 2 services, it has disrupted my routines. And so I'm aware of that. I'm aware of how that plays into things right now. And I just don't want me to be a barrier at all this morning. I don't want my humanness on this stage to in any way get in between what you would say to us. And so, God, would you somehow in this next little bit, in a supernatural way, would you take over the stage? Would you be our pastor? Would you be our preacher? And would you speak to us, each of us, exactly what it is that we need from you this morning? Thank you that you are so good and so gracious, and that today you will be so present to us. In Jesus' name, amen.
What a tragedy in America. This is one of the biggest tragedies in our culture, that billions of dollars are invested every year to get people my age to waste the rest of our lives. Billions of dollars invested to persuade us and lure us at any cost, it seems, to waste the rest of our lives. It's called retirement. And in sum, it goes like this. You work for it, now enjoy it. 20 years, perhaps, of play, leisure, ease, while the world, uncared for medically, uneducated, filthy water, poverty-stricken, unevangelized, sinks under the weight of healthy 65-year-old people playing bridge and shuffleboard and collecting shells and fishing and golfing their way into the presence of King Jesus. You're going to join them unless, at this stage in your life, you make some very radical decisions, very radical commitments, very radical choices about where your treasure is. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would seek to save his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it.
I wonder if you can think of a time where you have made a decision in your life to the neglect of the larger reality or the bigger picture around it and then ended up regretting it. You're like, I'm not sure where you're going. Let me give you a visual. Now, maybe some of you have seen this week because it's flying all around online, but I think it's hilarious, and it totally illustrates the point I'm trying to make. You guys see this article online? Is that California doesn't have enough going on right now. California man accidentally sets apartment on fire while trying to kill a spider. Okay, truth moment. How many of you would that be? How many of you would, yeah, see, in my house, my daughters would be those people. They would burn down the neighborhood to get rid of a spider. Me, I'm the guy that just grabs it by the web, takes it outside, lets the spider go. But they would destroy everything to get to that spider. Here's the point of a silly illustration like that is I just wonder. I wonder if some of us aren't risking burning down the life that God has given us right now in pursuit of things that at this present moment matter so much to us. Like what? The list is endless, right? certain bank account number, certain zip code you got to live in, the new upgrades to the house, the right car, the right wife, the right husband, the right school for the kids, on the right sports team, the right 401k, the right retirement plan, all this stuff. How many things are we living for right now that matter so much to us that if something doesn't change years from now, you are going to wake up and realize it was all a bunch of stupid spiders? That's truth. You can woo that a little more if you want. That's good too. See, I think the danger is that some of us are living our lives that way for spiders. Now, that the voice in that message, I don't know if you recognize it, if you know who he is. His name's John Piper. He's also a pastor. He's also an author. John Piper, that is an excerpt, what he said there, from a message he gave in 2000 to an audience of several thousand people at a giant conference. And in that, he shared two different stories as he tried to talk about the reality of this life in light of all eternity and how we make decisions that matter versus decisions that don't. And those two stories, 18 years later, for me, are still tremendously impactful. Like stories that every time I remember this illustration, it reorients some of my decisions. So I want to actually read them to you out of his words. So this is his sermon, not mine, but I think the illustration is powerful. So he says to this audience at this giant conference, 3 weeks ago, we got word at our church that Ruby Ellison and Laura Edwards had both been killed in Cameroon. Rudy was over 80 years old and had lived single all her life, and yet she had poured it out to one great end, to make Jesus Christ known among the unreached and the poor and the sick. Laura was a widow and a medical doctor also pushing 80 years old and served at Ruby's side in Cameroon. The brakes in their car failed one day when they were driving, and they went over a cliff and were both killed instantly. And I asked my people, so as he's talking to this conference, he's talking about the first time he shared the story to his church. Apparently these two women had some relationship to their church. He said, and I asked myself, and I asked my people, was that a tragedy? 2 lives driven by one great vision, spent in unheralded service to the perishing poor for the glory of Jesus Christ. When 2 decades after almost all of their American counterparts have retired to throw their lives away on trifles in Florida and New Mexico. And my answer to them is my answer to you. No, that is not a tragedy. That is glory. I'll tell you what a tragedy is, and I'll read it to you from Reader's Digest. What a tragedy is this, quote, Bob and Penny took early retirement from their jobs in the Northeast 5 years ago when he was 59 and she was 51. And now they both live in Punta Gorda, Florida, where they cruise on their 30-foot trawler, play softball, and collect shells. The American dream. Come to the end of your life, your one and only life, and let the last great work before you give an account to your Creator be, I collected shells. Look at my shells. Some are big, some are small, some are shiny. Aren't you impressed? That, my friends, is a tragedy. And people today are spending billions of dollars to persuade you to embrace the tragic American dream, and I get 40 minutes to persuade you and plead with you. Don't buy it. Obviously, the shells aren't about shells, right? The shells are the spiders. The shells are the stuff and the pursuits and the things that we think we need in this world that's going to give us a sense of peace, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of identity. It's the portfolio, it's the reputation, it's all the stuff in this world. The shells, obviously, aren't about the shells. I mean, my kids love shells. We go to the beach and we collect shells all the time. I don't know if your kids are like this. I don't know if it's like a McGlasson thing or if it's just a kid thing in general. We can't go to the beach without them coming home with bags of shells. And you think I'm joking? Like, your sisters aren't in here, so you say a word of this to them, you find a new home to live in. I go through their room on a regular basis, and I throw their shells away. Like, they just have to, don't owe me. I have shell shards in my feet because they're all over the room sometimes. I'm like, that's a shell. Like, they're just everywhere. My kids, I find shell bags in the garage that still stink like the ocean. They're just shells everywhere. They love collecting shells. If you're a 10-year-old little girl, collect shells all day long. That's fine. If you're 50 years old and you do it for a hobby, that's fine as well. Here's the problem. If this is what you're spending your life pursuing, there's a better treasure to live for. There's a better treasure to live for. Now, here's the thing I know, is that in a room like this, some of you already started disagreeing with me, and you're building up some resistance inside, and you're going to disagree even more so the more I go on this morning. And you're going to tell yourself, and if I was to sit down and have a conversation with you, you would tell me some of these same things. You'd say things like, well, listen, I have to make my retirement important and a priority. Because when I get there and then I get to that point in life, there's not going to be anything left in Social Security for me, or I don't want to be a drain on the system, or, well, what am I supposed to do then? And listen to me, I'm not talking about you needing to move to a place of poverty one day in your life, but you would say things like, listen, there's people that live lives way more frivolous than I do. You want to go after somebody who lives frivolous, go after somebody else, because that's not really me. You would tell me about why you need that particular house in that particular neighborhood, why you need that particular car. You would tell me about why it's not bad to enjoy the fruits of your labor, and you've worked hard, so why not celebrate some of that? You would tell me about why not everybody in the world can take the Mother Teresa pledge of poverty, and here's what I would just say back to you. I'm not talking about wealth. I'm not talking about stuff. I'm not talking about retirement, and I'm not talking about houses. I'm talking about your priorities and your heart, and where your heart is and what it's after in this world. I'm talking about asking you to take an honest inventory of your life and ask yourself, are you living to get your hands on the shells of this world to the potential risk of the destruction of something far more valuable? Your soul and your purpose and the very reasons that God put you on this rock. Why else do you think that there's another place in the Bible that we're taught that you can gain this whole world? You can get every piece of real estate, everything shiny, everything valuable. You can gain the whole world. Do you know what? And still what? You can still lose your soul. See, last arrow type of living, if you're going to live with that kind of focus, and you're going to live with that kind of measured purpose in everything you do, every way you breathe, every way you move, in your relational interactions and the decisions that you make, then I think it has to begin in this place. You have to see the world and all the stuff that it offers you in light of eternity and all that it requires of you. So Jesus tells a story once, and it's to this end, in this attempt to try and teach this very principle, and I want us to go there. So if you've got a Bible still in your hands, grab it, your phone, whatever it is that you use, or on the screen. We're going to go to a book called Luke. And we're going to go to the 12th chapter. The 12th chapter, this is what Jesus says in verse 13. He was teaching, by the way, just a little context. And as he finishes teaching, somebody comes up to talk to him, every bit as much as like today if I finish, and somebody comes to talk to me. So this guy walks up to Jesus, approaches him, and it says here, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, would you tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me?" And this is Jesus' response. Man, who appointed me a judge? That's just how it sounds in my head. I don't know what it's like. I don't know how else you read that. Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? So here's the thing. In all of our minds, we have pictures and images of probably what Jesus is like. And sometimes they're wrong, and sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're a little off. And then you read the Bible, and they can get adjusted, and you realize, oh, the Jesus in my head isn't the Jesus of reality. And I just wonder if this isn't one of those drastic moments where the Jesus in our head isn't quite the Jesus of reality. Because you notice that Jesus has a bit of a chip on his shoulder when he answers this guy. Right? Because here's what I would bet. In most of our minds, maybe not everybody, but probably the majority of us, Jesus is a little bit soft. Right? He's really tender, really compassionate, and just like super empathetic. And so in your mind, maybe if I wouldn't have finished how Jesus responded and just said, hey, how do you think he responded when this guy came and said, hey, my brother, he got the inheritance, he hasn't shared. Like probably most of us would default to something like, oh, really? Now tell me more. No way, like he got everything? Come on, man, he didn't give you nothing? Like you've got to feel really alone in that. Like you must feel pretty betrayed by your brother. Man, I'm really sorry. That's got to be really hard to go through. Hey, you know what? Let's go talk to him. I don't know if you know this, I'm a pretty big deal. I can be pretty persuasive. Let's go talk to your brother and see what we can do. Like maybe that's what you would think, because that's what I would kind of default to, because he so often presents himself with this massive, just dripping compassion, and yet that's not at all how he responds to this guy. As a matter of fact, he comes across with a little bit of an attitude, almost like he's got a chip on his shoulder against the question. And then notice, he never addresses it. So this would be no different than you and I today spending time praying to God and asking him to intervene into some situation in our lives, and then he ignores you. Because he never even responds to it, never brings it up, never identifies the issue, never responds to it at all. I'm going to say something right now that some of you are going to deeply disagree with. And it's not going to sit well with some of you. But just because it doesn't sit well doesn't mean that it's not true. So stay with me for a moment. There are things in life that you can pray about that God doesn't care about. There are things in this life that you can pray about that God doesn't care about. You go, that doesn't sound right. It sounds harsh. Not until you realize that this dude is coming to Jesus about a spider. About a spider. You might go, man, I thought God always cares about us. Bingo, he does. He always cares about you. The problem is in this life, we have taught ourselves to be wrapped up and concerned with a whole heck of a lot of things, my friends, that just don't matter. And then we bring it to God, hoping that he'll care about it. And I just wonder if sometimes we don't do what this guy's trying to do. Where he's trying to get God to care about things that he cares about that he wouldn't care about if he did care about what God cares about. That's a lot of caring about. You want to say it again? Sometimes we go to God in prayer and we lay out this stuff and we try to get him to care about the stuff that we care about that we wouldn't care about if we did care about what he cares about. Why? Because we see the spider. He sees the house. And some of us, listen to me, can I speak to some of you right now that you're blowing me off in your mind because you're a devout follower of Jesus? And you're like, oh man, I'm totally committed to Jesus. Do not kid yourself that this stuff doesn't have your heart wrapped up just because you sit in here on Sunday morning. There are some of us that claim Jesus is our Savior, but this is what we worship. It's junk and stuff and worries and frets and things and pursuits of this world that I'm going to tell you again is all going away one day. I know, I told you tell your sisters. New house, new zip code, kicking you out, boy. You're tall enough to make it on your own now. I will renounce my love of you. Let's go back to the story. Luke chapter 12, verse 15, Jesus continues to go on. And then he said to them, so this is what's great. So this guy comes up with a question to Jesus, and Jesus goes, all right, hold on. I'm going to make an illustration out of you. Hey, guys, I got a new sermon now. This guy's my example. That's what he does. He's like, hey, and he said to them, watch out and be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Would you just say that last line out loud, starting with life? Life. One more time. Life, your life, does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So when I went to Bible college, I had to take Greek and I had to take a little bit of Hebrew. And so I did some research this week and looked back in my Greek. And do you know what this phrase, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions, translates into when you go back to the original Greek, what it really means? Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. That's what it means. There's your dollars at work, Craig. Listen to me. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Some of you are like, I get it, dude. Say it 5 more times. Okay, life does not consist. This might be the most important thing that some of you came here for today and you don't even realize it. This might be the reason God's got you in this room right now and you don't even realize it. Is it because presently your life is so wrapped up in thinking that it's about the abundance of possessions, shells, and spiders that you can get your hands on. And God would have you to begin to reorient your understanding that your life is not about an abundance of your possessions. And so Jesus goes on and he finishes by telling a story. We call it a parable, but he makes up a story on the spot. And this is what he says to this group of people that are listening. Verse 16. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So his investments are doing good. Work is well. Pay is coming in. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear them down and I'll build bigger ones. I'm going to diversify. I'm going to open up other bank accounts. I'm going to put my money in different places and different options. And that's where I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you got plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you, and then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone, whoever it is, that stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. So here's this guy who's living for the spider, neglects the larger reality of eternity in which he lives, dies, and dies an absolutely poor, broke individual, listen to me, regardless of how much money he had in the bank. He died poor. And Jesus' word to this audience and to us today is, here's what he said, I wanted him rich. Just rich to a different end. And he describes it this way, wealthy towards God. I wanted him wealthy towards God. I want you wealthy towards God. Can you hear me say this? God wants you filthy rich. Filthy, stinking, wealthy, rich. That's God's desire for you. Now, before some of you go call the prosperity police and drag me out of here, listen to me. Matthew, the book of Matthew, let me tell you exactly what that means. Go to Matthew, actually on your screens. This is how Jesus defined that with more detail in Matthew. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy or where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves where what? Treasures in heaven. Listen, my fear is that some of you are going to hear the word treasure today and think that that's what this is all about, and you're going to miss the word eternity. You're going to miss the fact that what God was after with this group, with this guy that wanted inheritance, with the parable, and with you and I, is he wants us wealthy, but to a different end, for a different purpose, and in a different way than we have become accustomed to. It's not that he wants us poor. It's not that he wants us to give up everything we have. It's that he wants our minds to shift and realize that this world has convinced us that wealth is something far different than in all reality what it really is and where it's really found. Jesus says it's in being wealthy towards God. That means you're living for his principles, his priorities, his purposes, and your life, your 70, 60, whatever your life is lived in the larger purpose of all eternity, realizing none of this goes with you. But there is stuff that will. You know, one of my favorite examples of that is actually a guy that goes there, and I asked his permission, just so you know, to share a little bit about his story. And I don't know if he's here. I think he was here the first service. I don't know if he's here right now. But there's a guy who goes to our church. It's been so cool to just watch the transformation of his mind. Because that's what this is. This is all about your mindset beginning to transform and understanding where real wealth is and what life is truly all about. And I've watched this guy named Bill Kleskins that goes here go through that process the last couple of years. Now, Bill's an incredible guy. And if you've been here any length of time, you've heard his story. He's shared it on stage. He's been on screen. He's been baptized here and shared it personally himself. And so I'm not going to say anything that he hasn't said. But Bill is, he is a guy whose life was a wreck when he met Jesus. And he had run his life into the ground by pursuing so many other things in this world. And God literally, physically, just saved this guy out of so many things, including alcoholism and other things that had just created a wake of destruction around him. And what's so cool is the way that God did it is I think he was at the grocery store one day. He comes out to his car, and there was one of those little tracts, those gospel tracts. I have always hated those things. Like, anytime anyone's ever been like you should use those, and I know there's some of you here, Kirk, where you're at. I know, you use those all the time, man. You've got, a surplus of them. I'll just be honest with you. I've always hated those things and been like, if you're going to have a conversation, you need to have it with somebody's face. You don't just put a track on somebody's car. You don't put it on the table. And yet, here's what God will frequently do with me, is show me what little I know and show me how powerful he is in my ignorance. And so somebody put that on Bill's car. Bill, who had no interest in God and in spiritual things, he opened it up, he read it, and somehow in a very supernatural, miraculous way, God went wham and got his attention. And Bill's like, maybe my life needs a change. I'm like, that doesn't happen. It happened. It happened. And then that led to a conversation with a friend of his who came to this church at that time and said, hey, why don't you come check my church out? Now, here's the crazy thing. He lived downriver, 45 minutes away, with no traffic, on a good Sunday, 45 minutes away. So he came. Now, here's what was really cool. The first Sunday he ever showed up, he did his homework, and he had listened to almost every sermon we have online. It was crazy. Just went through the history, listened to all of them. Showed up, walked up to me. He's like, hi, you're Craig. I'm like, whoa. You got a son named Tobin. Jocelyn and Corinna are your daughters. I'm like, getting creeped out now. What's? He knew me. He knew my kids. He knew other people. He knew Pastor Mike. He just knew us because he'd listened to so many messages. Showed up, and he said, I need to get involved. Day one. I don't think he'd even been there for an hour. He's like, what do I do? He didn't say, I'm going to pray about it, see what God's will is. I'm going to see if this is the right place. He's just like, hey, I love Jesus. Jesus loves me. I want to get involved. What do I do? He came, got involved, ended up getting baptized, and I have just seen God radically change what this guy understands as the purpose and the priority of his life, of life in general. Why? Because he's seeing it through the lenses of eternity. Bill got involved in our group called the Road Crew because we weren't always in a building. We used to have to, down the road in the community center, we used to have to set up and tear down every single Sunday. Giant trailer pulled in, all the crates came out. It was ridiculous. He managed that at one point. Like, he didn't just get on it. We got him roped in. At one point, we actually said, hey, I think it was only like 2 months later. Like, hey, we're looking for somebody to lead the Road Crew. He's like, I'm your man. He led that team for a couple of years. Well, we don't have a Road Crew now because we're here. We have a facility. So when we moved in here, he started to take his broken past and turn it into his vision for his future, his purpose for now, and now he's running what we call Celebrate Recovery, a group here for people, whether it's recovering from alcohol or drugs or addictive things or just even hang-ups. Like, sometimes you just got junk that hangs you up, anger, resentment, relational stuff. And so that's what that whole group is about, and he put himself through a year-long training at another church just to be prepared for that. His whole life now is about serving other people in the name of Jesus, doing what he can to lead other people out of some of the brokenness that he found himself in all not that long ago. Bill is one of those guys too. They like his life isn't perfect, right? You catch Bill on the right day and in the right moment, you're going to get a little bit of the old Bill maybe. Just like with me, just like with you. You catch us on the right day and the right moment where we're not putting on our Sunday face. You're going to get us in the old you. You're going to get things that you want everybody else to see at church, right? He's not a perfect dude, but here's what I know. This is a dude that's living for an eternity, not for the present. This is a guy living for a reality that isn't yet fully realized because it's still yet to come. This is a guy who I am telling you, he will enter into eternity with a wealth that will follow him through every moment of the glory that God takes him into. This guy's rich, and he is developing a wealth on top of wealth. He's here. He's here for everything we do. We can't get rid of the guy. I don't even know if you realize this. A couple months ago, was it like 2 years ago maybe, he got hit by a car. Shattered, it broke him. I don't know, it just broke so much, it broke him. He had all this recovery and surgery he had to go through. He was still here serving all the time. Then he starts to recover from that. He's in here as we're just moving in, like a year ago, getting all the stuff worked out, building, getting ready for you guys. He's on a ladder behind this wall, putting film on the screen so the light doesn't come through. Fell off the ladder. Hits his heel on the floor and shatters it. Ends up having to, again, he's out of work again for several more months, has surgeries. So now you may know who he is. He's the guy that was on that scooter for the longest time, going through the hall like this. If you saw him on the other side of the half wall, it looked like he was floating. He is getting close to God. That's Bill. And even when he was in that condition, we couldn't keep him out of here. I'm like, Bill, what are you doing? He's got signs under his arm. He's like, Bill, go home. He's like, dude, this is my home. Where else would I be? I'm telling you, man, this is a guy whose mind has changed. And this is a guy who I'm going to bet if you ask him, hey, could you use a few more bucks in your bank? He would probably say, yeah. He spent almost a year out of work, maybe even a whole year out of work because of his injuries. But I'm telling you, this is a guy who's wealthy. And he's going to carry that wealth with him through all eternity. Because this is a guy who, in his mindset change, is realizing that all this stuff is shells and spiders. But man, to live this way, you have to have a certain disconnect from the values and the purposes and the priorities of this world and a certain connect to the priorities of God's kingdom, to the eternity in which we find ourselves. And so what Jesus ends up doing in this verse is he lays out a little bit more explicit detail of what that looks like. And I think in the next couple of verses that I want to read you, and they'll be the last ones for this morning, Jesus presents what is maybe one of the most difficult to embrace realities of what it means to live this life in light of all eternity. But this is what he says. If you go back to the same text that we've been in. And then Jesus said this to his disciples. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you'll eat, or about your body, what you'll wear. Your life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Think about the ravens. They don't sow, they don't reap, they don't have a storeroom or a barn, and yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than the birds? So who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you can't do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They don't labor, they don't spin. And yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? Do not set your hearts on what you'll eat or drink, and don't worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. So sell your possessions, give to the poor, and provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Can you imagine living life set free of all the nonsense that just wrings us out with stress day in and day out? And important stuff, right? He's not talking about unimportant stuff. He's not talking about extravagant vacations and 80-inch screen TVs, all the stuff that we don't really need. He's talking about clothes on your back, food in your belly, paying your bills. Like, he's talking about stuff that is important. But he says, don't worry about them. Do you not think that your Father, if you pursue his kingdom, has all of this in his hands and can shower you with it? Could you imagine living a life where we're set free from the anxiety and the stress and the burden and the pressure and just that gnawing sense of I don't have enough that plagues us day in and day out, because that's what he's talking about. He says, disconnect from that. Disconnect from that. It's not about this, it's about my kingdom. And if you pursue my kingdom, I'll give you the stuff that you need. But shift your priorities, he says. So I mentioned this in first service. I want to mention it again. Kind of spur of the moment thought. But when I went to Haiti years ago, this was actually one of the shells I brought back from Haiti for my kids. I know I'm playing into their whole addiction here, but I saw these giant shells. They were selling them on the beach for like $15. There were these guys who were like, hey, $15, $15. I'm like, man, that seems a little pricey. Then this little kid comes running up to me, and he's like, $5. That's all he said. I'm like, I think he just wants $5. Okay. So I figured, you know what? I'd rather give him $5 for nothing than this guy $15 for his shell. So I give the kid $5. And he takes it, and he runs, money in hand, out into the ocean and disappears. I'm like, what? Man, he's got a legit hiding place. Like, ain't nobody finding his money. And then I kid you not, he pops up out of the water with this in hand. Some of you were there. You remember that? He pops up. He's got this in hand. I'm like, dang! Like, totally undercut the guy on the beach. He was not a happy dude. So I'm like, here's 10 more bucks. Do it 2 more times. I got 3 kids. So he did. Like, whoop, whoop. And I'm all impressed. He's probably just got a stock of them just sitting in a basket down there. I don't know. But my time in Haiti was so incredible for me. I've had a hard time over the last couple of years explaining to you and even to my own family how that trip, just what it did for me in my own heart. You know, you go to a place like that and you think thoughts like, man, they're so poor. You think things like, I'm so sorry for them because they have so little, and you see all this despair and all this destruction. And then you meet a kid like I met named James Lee. And this little 7-year-old boy who just bubbles with all this life and passion and beauty and joy. And you start asking yourself, maybe I've mystified what wealth is. And you start to realize that maybe I'm not the one who's rich. Maybe I'm actually the one who's poor. Maybe he's rich, because it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. He doesn't have any of this stuff. And everything in the world you and I live in, everything about this world exists to convince us that that's what gives you what he had. And you start to realize something's wrong, something's off. And even as much as I know about this book and I know about Jesus and I'm committed to him, I started realizing how much my heart has begun to believe that this is what I got to get my hands on. And you start to realize where real wealth is. Listen, man, we are wringing ourselves to death trying to get our hands on this stuff. Thinking we need more of that. That's what's going to do it for us. That's what's going to complete us and satisfy us, give us the security and life that we need. Man, are we deceived. And you know how I know that that's true about all of us? It's because it's why so many of us, it's why we wake up every day exhausted no matter how much sleep that we got. It's why we constantly want more no matter how much we have. It's why we get the nice new thing, and then 2 weeks later it's lost its luster, and we need the next nice new thing. It's why we marry the person of our dreams, and then months later we start lusting over somebody else. It's why we spend billions of dollars every year on medicines and medical procedures to try and keep ourselves beautiful and young. It's why most days many of us are literally right here on the edge of agitation and cynicism and depression. It's because we are literally wringing ourselves out in the pursuit of that. More stuff. I just need more stuff. I need more success. I need the stuff the world tells me I need to get my hands on. That's what we need. Because remember when Jesus is talking to this guy doesn't have anything in his hands, right? When he comes to him with empty hands. Because here's what some of you may be doing right now. You may be like, well, I don't have a lot of stuff. So there you go. Preach this message to somebody else. I ain't got stuff. Well, neither did this guy. That's why he said, tell my brother to give me part of the inheritance. Because he didn't have it, which means his hands are empty, which means greed that Jesus went after. When this guy talked to me, he's like, you know what? That's okay. You remind me of something. It's called greed. And he starts preaching about greed. In other words, it must be first a passion in your heart before it's a pursuit of your life. That's where it starts. It will exist here before it ever becomes the stuff in your hands. So don't fool yourself that just because you don't have, Donald Trump wealth, that this can't possibly apply to you. And I just wonder if God was to spend a moment with you today, kind of like a financial advisor, and take stock of your wealth towards God, would he come away and say that you are wealthy or you are broke? So here's where on a Sunday I would usually start laying out some application, or maybe I probably would have before this, and I'd have very specific things I want you filling out in the morning, because I never want you to come in here on a Sunday morning and we open this and you walk away and you don't know what to do with it. But the thing about a morning like this is that the application is going to look so different for us. The end result is going to take us to the same place, but the application is going to look different because you and I have got our hands on a lot of different things, and some things I need to let go of aren't the things you got to let go of. Some of the things that I need redirected in my mind aren't the things you need redirected and reprioritized in your mind. And so here's what I just want to do for our application today. I want to give you one simple prayer that I'm going to challenge you every day of this series to pray. Find a moment and pray this to God, and then take a moment and listen to see if he has anything back. The series is about 4 weeks, so 30 days, so about a month. Every day pray this prayer, and then 2 questions. One of them is going to be to ask of yourself, and one of them is going to be to ask of him. Here's the prayer. We're going to put it on screen so you can even write it down. Here's what a lot of people in first service did. They took a picture because we couldn't keep them all up for too long. So Jesus, will you cultivate my heart to care about the things you care about and to let go of the things that you don't? That's what I want you to pray every day for the next 30 days and see what he begins to do. And here's the question I want you to ask yourself. What am I presently doing, pursuing, or caring about that doesn't matter in light of eternity? In other words, what spider am I chasing? Here's a question I want you to ask him. What eternal endeavors, what eternal pursuits, and what eternal concerns do you want to occupy my life this next year? You get one life. You get one arrow. May we live it driven by the passion and the reality of eternity, not the passions of this life. And my hope is that you and I will get to the end of our lives and we will literally have wrung ourselves out to our very last breath. My hope is that we won't have the energy left in us to walk the beaches of Punta Gorda collecting shells, because we're going to leave it all on the field for Jesus between now and then, wringing ourselves out for his kingdom, that we may enter into glory, filthy rich towards God. Father in heaven, take these words that are yours, make them our reality, I pray. Amen.
Man, I am so tired of hanging so tightly on the things that don't matter. I want to be willing to let go of all that stuff and start pursuing the things that God has for me. He is so passionately and madly in love with us. And man, I want to have what he has for me and no longer what I think I can make for myself. Would you guys stand and sing with us this morning?
It's my hope is that we really do wake up this next year, and that the words of that song aren't just words, that they are the pursuit of our lives. It seems fitting, too, that this morning, with all the imagery and the hunting and the arrow and all that, that we are selling tickets like I mentioned earlier. So I just want to encourage you. The Big Buck Dinner that we're doing in February, it's the first one ever that we've done. So many things we can do now that we have our own facility. But as always, we don't do anything here without the expressed desire to reach people who don't like church and who don't understand that there's a God who loves them, who made them, who formed them, who has plans for them. And so this is very much an event that we're planning, not just so we can all get together and eat meat. Come over to my house for that. Well, Mike's house. He's got bigger. Like we can do that. This is for you to bring your friends to that maybe yet wouldn't step in on a Sunday morning. I'm inviting my whole hunting crew, and I'm hoping that they're all going to be here. So tickets are $20. I promise you, you're going to get every bit of that $20 out of it. Even if you're like, well, I'm not a hunter. Doesn't matter. It's for you. Somebody asked me earlier, is this just a guy's thing? Like, what year do you think we live in? No. This is for everybody. If you like to eat, then come. If you like to hunt, then get there. We're going to have great raffles, great stuff that we're giving away. Thing I'm most excited about, a friend of mine that I made a couple years ago named Justin Gibbons, lives in Idaho, is a big game hunt and guide, also a pastor. I want his job. He is coming here. We're flying him in. He's going to speak that night and share his story. He's got some video he's put together of some of his expeditions, some of his hunts, and just talk about how life is more than just that. It's about the pursuit of Jesus, and he's a not-missed story. So get your tickets, $20 a ticket, buy one, buy two for a friend. We're selling them for the next couple of weeks right outside at the tables. You all are so loved. Thank you for making the launch of our 2-service Sunday a success, and we hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.